There are 5 P's in medical school. The 5 P's of medical schools are peculiar courses, peculiar subjects that medical students over the years have found to be very interesting. They're interesting because they have a particularly difficult pass statistic. So the 5 P's of medical school are physiology, pharmacology, pathology, psychiatry, and of course, last but not the least, pediatrics. Now, physiology is the first P. It's called a P because it's on the average, people find it more difficult than the rest of the other courses. That's why those subjects stand out in particular. Now, physiology, in this video, what we want to do is to talk about, tips, tricks, an approach that would help you have a solid understanding of your physiology, not just for the exam, but also to carry some of it alongside when you get into clinicals and eventually when you begin to manage your patients generally. Now, there are some peculiarities about physiology that I'd like you to be aware of before we get into the heart of this video. But before that, my name is Dr. Peter. I'm a medical doctor and content creator currently working in Nigeria. And if you're new on this channel, we talk about medical stuff, school stuff, hacks, tricks, clinical stuff that you need that will make your stay medical school interesting and the transition to clinical practice also smooth. So if you are new on this channel, like this video and subscribe, and then but let's get into the main subject for today. So physiology. There's some peculiarities. Unlike anatomy, and there was a video about it, like we did a video on anatomy a few weeks ago. Unlike anatomy, where you have to read, the various subsets of anatomy, physiology is just like one. Is the bulk of itself that you have to, go through. On one side is an advantage because if you have one solid textbook, if you have one really good textbook, you are good to go. But on the flip side, it tells you that it has the same weight as anatomy. Most times, the study of physiology is, it's concentrated, so you have to actually take your time to really get, the hang of it. Anatomy, for example, is mostly fact-based. It's fact-based. So anatomy is fact-based, and with a strong recall memory, you can know what nerve is this, what structure is this, what muscle is this, what bone is this. But physiology, on the other side, is not just facts. You also have to follow the logic. You have to follow the meaning of what is happening. So if this happens, what is the response? What is the cause and what is the effect? So those are the kind of things you'll be looking at in physiology. So it's dynamic. One book is enough, but it's dynamic. You have to actually take your time and follow how the body functions. Now, by the time you get familiar with names like Walter Cannon, Charles Sherrington, Claude Bernard, by the time you are familiar with those kind of names, then you are really well started. To make this study of physiology very interesting, especially when it comes to exams, I made a guidebook, a small handbook, something that just focuses on the most common things that recur in exams generally in medical school. These are the hot topics, the hot spots. These are the things you must know before you get into the exam for every system that you're going to study, from cell and body defense all the way to respiratory system, cardiovascular system, the endocrinology, and all the way, like what you need to know, the hot facts. I have a guidebook on that. I call it Physiology 101, and that's it on your screen. There's an audio book, there's a PDF, and it's totally free. There's no cost to it whatsoever. I'm going to drop a link here to a Google document that you can actually just click in and download the book and then have it to support your study. It's designed in such a way that it has outlines. It has what exactly we want to talk about in this video to orient your study of physiology, such like that. Initially, when I was studying physiology, I had some problems because I couldn't translate my study into exams. Like I couldn't bring my understanding to the exam. It took me some time before I was able to orient myself, and when I did and I started doing well with my exams, I decided to compile these stuffs into a book, a handbook that any student can have. And to make it more convenient, we made an audio book so you can just listen. And I think I should say special appreciations to the following students. So I want to give a special shout out to every student who contributed to make Physiology 101 a reality. You guys are amazing. You guys, because of you, a lot of medical students are finding the study of physiology very interesting. So thank you very much, and shout out to you. So now back to how to study physiology. There is learning the facts, then there is making it make sense to you. To learn the facts, you can choose any of the textbooks you want. If you want the review of medical physiology, popularly known as Ganon among medical students, it's a beautiful book. If you want the Indian books, medical physiology, Sebulingam, great. If you want the huge textbook, guiding and all, that's amazing too. What I would say, however, is choose a textbook that you can rely on depending on what is required or what is expected from your school. You have Ganon, you have Physiology 101 designed by myself and those people who contributed, then you are very, 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 very well equipped to go. Now, follow the logic. What does that mean? Know the meaning of what is happening. Take your time. Draw charts. Understand it very well. Initially, when I was having difficulties having an understanding of physiology, I experienced Kaplan medical videos with particular emphasis to Dr. Amy Fisher and Dr. K. His nickname is Dr. K. He's an Indian American physiologist, great teacher, and they made me understand. They were not just teaching the facts of physiology, like for example oxygen dissociation curve or factors. They were not just saying that, they were also relating it with stories, practical experiences. So when they're telling you about respiratory physiology and dead space, they'll be telling you how Olympics swimmers, gold medalists, how they control their breaths underwater physiologically. So you can be able to understand dead space not just as the volume of air that is ventilated but not perfused. That is like a technical definition, but if you know that the space between the nose and then all the way to the bronchi where exchange of oxygen does not happen in the lungs, that volume is dead space. If you understand that and you see how swimmers use it and you see how deep sea divers actually use it, if you hear it and understand it like that, you begin to understand it better. And not just about respiratory physiology, cardiovascular physiology and the rest of it also. So as I said earlier, follow the logic. Great teachers recommended Dr. Amy Fisher, Dr. K. I'll in the description box of this video, I'll probably put a link to some of their videos so that you can see what I'm talking about. So you don't just go through your physiology lectures in a boring way, you can actually understand it. And now let's talk about a little bit about exams. Translating your knowledge. Now you've understood physiology, translating it to exams. How do you go about this? Here are some pointers. Number one, always give an intro when you are discussing your question, especially when you're talking about when you're writing the essays in the exam. Always give an introduction. And in your introduction, since you're going to be learning anatomy and physiology pari passu, your introduction to capture a little bit of anatomy so that the core stuff you want to give is going to be mostly physiology. For those of you that are medical students, you understand what I'm saying exactly, because you're going to be writing your exams almost together, or your end of postings, you're going to be doing it almost together. So carry along, make your anatomy your introduction. It's just 2 or 3 lines after all. Make it your introduction such that you set the tone in your lecturer's mind of what exactly you want to discuss, depending on whatever question is asking. The next thing is, whenever you are asked to differentiate between between 2 things or 3 things, always do it in a tabular form. Always do your differentiation in a tabular form. Even if you're supposed to give characteristics of some things, it's best to do it in a tabular form. That way it makes your writing, it makes your answer concise, and it helps you to be able to put all your answers in a small space so that your lecturer sees at a glance that you understand what the question is talking about. Instead of writing long stories in explaining the mechanism of action of a particular thing, for example, insulin as a hormone, for example, if you are doing endocrine physiology, using flowcharts, using annotated diagram will go a long way of showing you, feedback, the homeostasis of that particular hormone, the feedback, the feed forward. You can do both the effector and the response. You can do it so annotated diagrams, flowcharts will help you explain more than 3 pages of writing can. And frankly, you don't have so much to even write so much. You don't have so much time to write so much volume in your exam. So annotated diagram will do a lot. You can quickly draw your diagram and then use brief notes underneath to explain what you mean in the diagram. That's how you are going to even do if you're explaining to your friend, you probably use annotated diagram. So if you want to answer your questions in the exam, why go out to town writing essays when your examiner probably has 100 scripts to mark? So maybe annotated diagrams will pass your points across better. The core of your answer should be in mechanism of actions and regulation. A synonym for physiology they will always tell you is what? Homeostasis. So every time you are answering a question, think about how you can capture the homeostasis of that particular thing. So for example, if you're discussing insulin as a hormone, if you don't talk about regulations, mechanism of actions and regulation, you've really not talked about the functioning. So it's important that you keep that in mind every time you are answering a question, except your question is entirely a short answer question where you have to list maybe 25 characteristics of something, then you don't have to. But if it's a question that you have to discuss muscle contraction, discuss the stages of neuromuscular the events at a neuromuscular junction, then you must be thinking about regulations as part of your answers. Another important fact that medical students generally should apply in exams will be clinical correlates. Before you conclude your answers, you should think about clinical correlates, pathophysiology that concerns a particular subject you are discussing. So in the neuromuscular junction we're talking about, so maybe you'll be thinking about anesthetic agent, you'll be talking about muscle relaxants. These are things that have clinical translation. It tells your lecturer or the person marking your script, your examiner, that not only do you have an understanding of the physiology that he's asking, but you also know how it translates into clinical practice, into pathophysiology, or either into clinical practice in terms of therapeutics, or how it translates into disease pathology. So this way we know that you have a very solid understanding of the neuromuscular junction, not just about how it functions, but also about the diseases that can happen in the neuromuscular junction, like Lambert syndrome, like use of tubal curareins and anesthetic agent. That way your examiner, they know that, okay, this guy really knows what he's talking about. Meanwhile, there is also a mark allocated in the marking scheme of most physiologists for clinical correlates or for pathophysiology. So you should have that at the back of your mind when you're answering your question. Anytime you're doing essay exams, as a medical student, there are like 5 important things you cannot do without when you're answering questions. Like you have to have these at the default in your head anytime you are tackling exam questions. And what are these? The first is you must have an introduction, you must have a conclusion, you must have clinical correlates, you must have diagrams. So these are the 4 things that you cannot do without when you're answering a question. Then you might now have tables to differentiate, diagrams and stuff like that. What I'm trying to get at essentially is have it at the back of your mind that you might need to draw something. You need to draw so that you can use your diagram to explain what you want to do. And of course, when you draw, you leave a footnote and you leave a title. So that way your diagram is not just, untitled, it's not just vague, it's not unspecific. It actually is specific and is tailored towards achieving a particular thing, which is high marks in the exam in this particular case. So I think with that, you would actually do a lot already in physiology. The last part to talk about in physiology will probably be practicals. Physiology has practicals, and the practicals in physiology, well, they are graded in different ways across different schools. However, but usually there's a practical guide that shows you. So for example, when you're learning about blood and blood physiology, you go to the lab, you use microscope and you look at basophils, eosinophils and neutrophils under the microscope. So that constitutes your practicals. In the same way, when you're doing neurophysiology, you're probably going to do contractions using electrical voltage to elicit muscular contraction in, for example, a mammal like a frog or whatever animal is brought before you during the practicals. So practicals constitute usually around 15 to 20% of your maths. You can't ignore it, even though you have 70 or 80% of your maths in the theoretical part of physiology. Your practicals are a significant component of your maths. If you don't want to know it because of the knowledge sake, don't forget that your marks are actually part of it. And really, I've come to see that if you have an understanding of the practicals in physiology now, when it comes to translating it into research or into clinical practice, you will be able to understand how to function, how to cope in the lab. You understand, scientific method as it applies to physiology and practicals, how to report your experiments, how to document them, and eventually how to conduct them under exam conditions. So don't forget about your practicals. Get a practical manual, the clinical notes and the practical boxes in your textbooks. Note them whenever you want to study for your practicals, and that would orient you properly when it comes to your practical exams. Until we see again and we discuss other courses, my name is Dr. Peter. If you are new, please like and share this video with some of your colleagues who will be doing physiology as well. See you in the next video. Ganon, you can't go wrong with Ganon. The reason why is because the facts are, the values therein are reliable, and the book is renowned all over the world. So it's a book that you can actually read and understand. But as I said earlier, what your seniors are saying, what your school requires is more important. But however, my recommendation is Ganon.